Welcome to another edition of Hey Bobby with Senior VP of the Cleveland Guardians, Bobby DiBiasio, with us here on WAKR, brought to you by J.W. Dodado Electric. Bobby, this past weekend, had a chance to go to the Major League Baseball, Pro Baseball Hall of Fame in the village of Cooperstown. And I could go on and on from the Field of Dreams to the village to the Hall of Fame. But you know what? It's summertime season, and you and I like to talk baseball and baseball history. And I thought maybe, because I know you've been there so many times, that you can talk not only about the Hall of Fame, but certainly Cleveland baseball's imprint there. And I saw it all over the hall when I was there, from Early Wynn to Frank Robinson, Joe Charbonneau, Sandy Alomar. It's a wonderful visit into that Hall of Fame. And I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because it's really not that long of a ride to go to Cooperstown and take in baseball history.
Well, Ray, we can be the Chamber of Commerce for the village of Cooperstown, right? Now that you've been there,
Yeah.
Everyone just falls in love with the whole setting. I think one of the first things that you mentioned to me was the fact that you're just walking down an old main street in a little village, and next thing you know, at the end of the street, there's this museum. There's this Hall of Fame. And I think that's one of the things that people don't realize, the actual name. It's the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. So when people say, oh, Pete Rose needs to be in the Hall of Fame, well, there's a discussion as to why he's not an actual Hall of Famer, but they don't exclude him from being in the museum as the hit king in baseball. They do celebrate the fact he had 4,000 plus hits with Ty Cobb. And so he's all around the museum aspect. It's not like he's a forgotten guy. It's just the rules involved in your ability to be inducted is different. But the quaint village of Cooperstown, with the memorabilia shops and the little restaurants and Doubleday Field, just as you walk down Main Street, take a quick right, and in the back there's Doubleday Field. For those who are golfers, there's a Leatherneck golf course right attached to the Otesaga Hotel. I don't know if you had a chance to walk over there. I forgot to make sure that you went and sat on the veranda and had a cocktail overlooking the lake and the golf course just sitting there. If you're a casino guy or lady and golf as well, Turning Stone is about an hour drive from Cooperstown. So they have 4 golf courses and a casino. So you can make that whole trip into something really fun. But to visit the Baseball Hall of Fame and the museum, if you're baseball freaks like you and I, it's nirvana. There's just something, because you just slowed down, right? One of the first things you did was you just slowed down and just absorbed it all.
The one thing that stood out to me, Bobby, and I love the way they did it, was the evolution of the game with the baseballs the way they were in the 1800s and early 1900s, and uniforms and shoes and gloves and all the protection, like the catchers and the umpire stuff, and then the evolution of the game up through. And like I opened it up, Cleveland baseball history is really all through there. I like, for example, I forgot about the Joe Charbonneau song and that type of thing. There's so much there throughout it, not only with baseball, but baseball. And then the uniforms. And I love the old wool things going, they had the Pirates and they had the old Cleveland Indians uniforms, and the evolution to the A's of the mid 70s. It's really well done, the way they take you from the 1800s to the present time.
No, they really do. Somewhere between 36, 39 players, managers, scouts that were a part of our organization are inducted into the Hall of Fame. There's 17 that are inducted into the Cleveland baseball franchise, and people will have to get used to it being the Cleveland Guardians Hall of Fame. There's 40 some in our Hall of Fame. 17 of those are in Cooperstown, 3 of which, Napoleon Lajoie, Tris Speaker, and Cy Young, were part of the 1937 induction class in Cooperstown, the second class ever inducted. So yeah, in the sense of the Hall of Fame area, you walk through there and look at their plaques. There's 17 that spend most of their career with our franchise. If you walk through that area and looked at the Hall of Fame and all the plaques, and they do it by year, here's the year, like 1962, Bob Feller with Jackie Robinson and going into the Hall of Fame. You'll notice a little medal on the plaque that talks about military service to our country. And Bob Feller was the leader on that.
Oh, okay.
Bob Feller went to the Hall of Fame and with one of the secretaries of the Navy, I can't remember which one at this, maybe John Dalton, who I think was the 70th Secretary of the Navy, or the 70th, and said, we need to make sure that people understand that these Hall of Famers left the game of baseball to serve our country in a time of need. And instead of redoing every plaque to add the wording, they came up with the little medallion that they placed on the plaque to identify the service to our country, so which I thought was pretty cool. Obviously, Bob was so very proud of his time spent during World War II aboard the USS Alabama, right in the middle of his incredible career. But I thought, Ray, anxious to hear your thoughts. One of the parts of that museum that really I spend a lot of time every time I go is looking at the rings and looking at the trophies. There's 4-foot high trophies. They're back in the 1800s. As you mentioned, that looked like a Stanley Cup. But just the evolution, as you say, of the game itself and all the different nuances, from baseball cards to uniforms to the baseballs to bats. But the rings to celebrate champions is pretty interesting as well.
I agree with speaking of bats, and that was another thing that I was gravitated to, and looking at the evolution of the bats and how those old ones, Bobby, were almost just like a stick of wood. So you can understand where the long ball really wasn't a part of it. And then eventually you get the barrels and everything on the bats. And you told me an interesting story years ago pertaining to bats, because I saw the video over the weekend at the Hall of Fame, and that was Babe Ruth making that speech, one of his final speeches. And I thought maybe you could reiterate that story of that bat that he's leaning on during that speech, because you gave me that story years ago.
Babe Ruth's final appearance at Yankee Stadium prior to his death, he did not have the strength to stand on his own at home plate in front of the microphone to speak to the Yankee Stadium crowd. The Yankee clubhouse used to be on the third base side, and they moved it to the first base side. And we, the Indians, were in town that night, so we're in the third base dugout, and Babe Ruth wanted to go see his locker one last time, that he dressed in. And comes out of the locker room and sits next to Bob Feller, because they had known each other for a long, long time. And so they're sitting and talking, and then all of a sudden it's time to do the pregame ceremony. So as he's getting up, he grabbed, Bob Feller happened to have one of his bats leaning against his leg. So he grabbed the bat, walked out of the dugout, using it as a cane. That famous photo of him, you see his back with the packed house at Yankee Stadium. Mr. Dolan, Larry Dolan, helped Bob Feller purchase the bat from a collector. A collector ended up finding that, getting hold of that bat. I think a collector happened to be in Seattle. And Bob and Larry and I were sitting in the press dining one night, and Bob was telling the story, and Larry called me in and said, hey, let's go get that bat so Bob could put it in his museum in Van Meter. That's where it belongs. I mean, that's the kind of fan Larry Dolan and Paul Dolan are. They appreciate the history of the game and what things mean to players. And so we went through that process. And when Bob passed away and we needed to, unfortunately, sadly, close the Bob Feller Museum in Van Meter and take most of the stuff back to Cleveland, on the third floor of the Terrace Club, we have the Bob Feller exhibit. And there's one exhibit that has the bat and a huge mural of that famous photo. So if you're at the Progressive Field, the Terrace Club's open to the public. Feel free to get on up there as you're walking the ballpark and take in that history and check out the Bob Feller exhibit. But it's one of the great pieces of memorabilia for sure.
Another piece that stood out to me, and I thought of you immediately because I wanted you to expand a little bit, when I was at the Hall of Fame, was a plaque on Addie Joss. And how good of a pitcher this was. And unfortunately, passed away at an early age. And the result of that was Ty Cobb wearing a Cleveland uniform. And you told me this story as well. So I'm tying this all into the Hall of Fame and our visit with Senior VP Bobby DiBiasio this week of our Cleveland Guardians. Bobby, talk about that picture and how really, unfortunately, Addie Joss's death turned into something pretty big.
Yeah, he passed away of meningitis, I think at the age of 31, a very promising career. He's elected into the Hall of Fame back in 1978 and, threw a perfect game for the Cleveland. I think back in 1908, if I have it correct. Yeah. And upon his death, he was such a well-liked player that the players got together and said, we need to do an exhibition game to raise money for his widow. And so a group of all-stars came to Cleveland, to League Park, and played the Cleveland team in an exhibition game. Now, the story goes that Ty Cobb either forgot his uniform or it was stolen out of the locker room. And therefore, he had to put on a Cleveland uniform to perform that day at League Park. And that awesome photo of all the guys standing in line. A lot of people believe that was the precursor to the All-Star game. Mm-hmm. That All-Star game didn't come about until 1933. 1933 was the year Chicago was the site for a World Expo. And the sports editor of the Chicago Tribune, I believe, maybe the Sun-Times, said that baseball needed to be part of this World Expo in Chicago. And so they created the All-Star game. 2 years later, 35, Cleveland played host to their first of 6 All-Star games, to our 6 All-Star games. So a lot of people think they hearken back to this All-Star exhibition for Addie Joss as the first real All-Star game, and truly the precursor to what we now know as the All-Star game.
Well, there you go. The president and the VP of the Cooperstown Chamber of Commerce, Bobby DiBiasio and Ray Horner this morning. But I made the trip there. Bobby has been there so often. It is the summertime season, maybe a good time to jump in the car and go visit it. I'm telling you, it is worth the trip. We've been having another edition of Hey Bobby, Senior VP with the Cleveland Guardians. Bobby DiBiasio, brought to you by JW Dodano Electric. Bobby, my friend, thank you again for the visit. We'll reconnect again next week.
Sounds good, Ray. Yeah, this was a fun one, talking history in Cooperstown. Go Guardians.